a scripture today. It comes from Genesis chapter 16. It's a lot of hard words, so please be kind. Okay, so this is about the story of the birth of Ishmael. This is the story of Sarai and Abram. They become Sarah and Abraham. Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave girl whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go to my slave girl. May it be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. He went to Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave girl to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Your slave girl is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave girl of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Now you have conceived and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He shall be a wild man, with his hand against everyone, and with everyone's hand against him, and he shall live at odds with all his kin." So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roi," for she said, "I have really seen God and remained alive after seeing him." Therefore, the well was called Beer Lahai-roi, as it lies between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. May God transform understanding into action.
I nanny for 3 children, and my sister also is a nanny, and she has 4 children. The kids I nanny for are Molly, who is 10, Nancy is 8, and Patrick is 4. My sister nannies for a girl, Sophie, who's 6, twin boys, Wolfie and Joaquin, who are 5, and then a little girl named Chloe. There's too many. And Patrick, who I nanny for, who is 4, and the twins have been friends since they were babies. They're the best of friends. They spend all their time together if they could, running around being crazy. The problem is that Patrick, when he was younger, seemed very confused by the concept of twins. It seemed for the longest time he thought that his friends were just able to be everywhere at one time. They had this ability to be where he wanted them, and he called them one name, Wolfie Keeney, no matter what. When we'd ask him about, like, "Oh, did Wolfie do this or Keeney?" he'd be like, "No, that was Wolfie Keeney that I played with." As he got older, he realized that there were 2 of them, not 1, but he could not tell them apart, which isn't that surprising, seeing as sometimes I cannot tell the twins apart. But the twins now are at an age where they are very strongly aware of who they are, and they want to be called by their correct name. If I go up to a twin and say, "Stop, Keeney," he won't listen, and he'll keep doing it. And then he'll say, I'm not Keeney, I'm Wolfie, and finally begin to listen because I did not use his name. And the same thing happened when Patrick is talking to them. Patrick has begun, though, to realize who they are by asking them when they first meet, are you Wolfie, are you Keeney? And then remembering based on their outfit. But he also is realizing who they are based on the fact that they have different personalities. Keeney loves to follow the rules. He doesn't like to disappoint the adults in his life. He's scared of hurting their feelings. And so he's more likely to listen to what you say and not to be a daredevil and break the rules. Wolfie, on the other hand, does not have that fear and will run crazy from the minute you see him. And because of this, you can guess that usually if Patrick is running up to someone when they first meet, it's Wolfie, because he has learned that this difference exists. But the twins, they know who they are, and they want other people to know who they are as well. They don't want to just be considered one entity of Wolfie and Keeney. They want to be an individual. They want to be called by their name. In the story we read today, my Bible gave it the heading, Hagar and Ishmael. Hagar is at the heart of this story. She's the one who is having the child that we are learning about. But it's fascinating because we don't get her whole story without the background of Abram and Sarai. Abram and Sarai were given a promise by God that they would have a child. A promise that is something that is amazing, something that they have longed for. But it's been over 10 years since they received this promise, and still no child. I can't imagine the anxiety that this can lead them to have. Has the promise changed? Did God not want to give them a child anymore? Or were they simply not doing what needed to be done to get this child? Sarai thinks she has the answer. She will give her slave girl, Hagar, to Abram to sleep with so that they can have the child. That maybe is the prophecy that God talked about. This may seem strange to you, to give your husband someone else to have a child with. It's not generally how we go about things today. But in this time, it was very common to do this. It was actually expected that if you could not have a child, you would provide someone for your husband to have a child with so that they could have an heir. And the amount of time that you would generally wait was 10 years from your marriage. And Sarai didn't wait 10 years from her marriage. She waited till after 10 years after God had spoke. So the amount of time that she even waited to provide Abram with someone to have a child with was longer. And then she gives Hagar to Abram, and Abram says yes, and Hagar conceives. And it seems that almost instantly, Sarai regrets this. She regrets the fact that Hagar is pregnant, that Hagar is the one that is going to have a child. And we can understand this if we think about the fact that the woman's worth at this time was in having children. If you had a child, you were considered blessed by God. And if you didn't, you were seen to be under a curse from God. So Sarai probably wonders why her servant is blessed by God when she is not. And so she goes to Abram angry, blaming him for this that was her idea, and asking him to handle it. For Abram tells her, oh, it's in your hands, do what you would like. And you have to wonder, did he hope that Sarai had good ideas in her head, good morals, that she would be just with Hagar? Or did he just not care? Honestly, it's not a very good look for Abram at this time, because Sarai does not have good ideas in mind for how to talk with Hagar about how she's being treated. Instead, she mistreats Hagar, and Hagar flees. The next we see of Hagar, she's in the desert, on her way home, and is found by who the text calls the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord asks Hagar, Hagar, where are you going, and where have you come from? And Hagar tells the angel of the Lord, I am running from my mistress. While reading the story, this is the point where I realized the narrator has used Hagar's name. But Abram and Sarai have never addressed her by her name. The angel of the Lord is the first person to do so. Up until this point, she has been dressed as slave or slave girl. She has been known only by her job that she has had, not for who she actually is. They never gave her an identity. But the angel of the Lord comes, and they don't see Hagar the slave. They see Hagar the person. Sarah and Abram didn't see the humanity that Hagar had as a child of God. They saw her only as a slave. They saw her for what she could do for them, have a child, not for who she was. Having a child wasn't the problematic part. It was actually something that God promised them years before. But they were willing to step and minimize someone else in order to get that child at that time. They didn't consider Hagar the person with feelings, a person of worth. She was just the ends to the mean, a way to have a child, a servant, a slave, someone who didn't even have a name, someone who they didn't care to see or to hear. When I think about the story of Hagar, I think about how often I've heard the story of Abraham and Sarah in the promised child. I've heard it in Sunday school lessons since I was probably like 3. I've heard it in Bible stories and Bible studies and in church services. But then I also thought how little I have heard of Hagar. How often it can be easy to minimize those around us who maybe aren't the grand story that we are looking forward to. And this isn't only true in our Bible lessons, it's also true in our lives. We see this happening all the time in the world around us. It's so easy to prioritize others over some. It's easy to prioritize ourselves over others. We see people, and we think that maybe we're better than them. Maybe not a lot, but a little. What we want is worth more than what they want. At least it is to us. And so we prioritize what we want and often don't consider who we might be hurting to get where we want to go. And our culture encourages this. We're supposed to climb to the top and not worry about who we're stepping on in the meantime. Strive for greatness and not care who it hurts. And it's so easy to fall into this trap. Abram and Sarai did this. The desire to have a child was so great, they didn't consider the effect it would have on those around them, the effect it would have on Hagar, who was going to be bearing this child. She wasn't a person they considered worthy of thought. And the laws and culture of this time encouraged that. They said that Sarai had the right to give her slave to Abram without a second thought. And we have laws and culture in our society that encourages the same thing. We are held to a higher law, and it's oftentimes we need to consider how Jesus and God would ask us to act, not how our society would like us to act. Our dreams and our desires are important, and God has given us these dreams and desires for a reason, but stepping on others is not the way to gain them. We should be better than our culture, thinking that we can just hurt people to get where we want to go. We shouldn't ignore the humanity that others have. We should not ignore the fact that they are a child of God, even if they are different than us. They are not replaceable, nameless people that we can walk over just to get what we need and then dispose of when it becomes an inconvenience. When we disagree or reach a rough patch, even then, they are someone who is loved by God, someone who holds value and is worthy of their own story. Hagar found herself on the side of the road, broke down, alone, pregnant, and most definitely scared. She had been mistreated by Sarai, the wife of the man who had gotten her pregnant, and now the angel of the Lord is telling her, "Go back and submit to her." Hagar has had no interaction with God as far as we can be aware at this point. The God of Abram and Sarai is not the God of Hagar and her people. And so a God who she has never known, telling her to go back to a place where she was mistreated, had to be hard to hear, much less do. But the angel not only tells her to go back, he gives her a prophecy for her child and a promise that is similar in ways to the one that Abram receives in Genesis 12. A promise that she will have a child, a promise that he will have great people, and then it kind of gets a little more negative. He won't be the promised child of the prophecy, but he will be a child that will lead people. The angel tells her to name her son Ishmael, And after this, Hagar gives a name to the angel of the Lord. She says, "You are the God who sees me." For he heard her cry that may have been out loud, but her cry that also may have been in her heart, a silent plea, a longing to belong. The angel of the Lord found her on the side of the road and called her by her name, something that she possibly hasn't heard since she has been with Abram and Sarai. She wasn't truly seen by them in her time there, not for who she was. She was seen as a slave, someone who could have children, and as a means to an end. She wasn't seen as a true person until now. And then God heard her misery. He heard her pain, and he acknowledged it. Yes, he called Abram and Sarai from the life that they were living to be the father and mother of a group of people that would be in the line of the Savior of the world. But he didn't only see them in their family, in their story. He also sees others. He sees their pain and their suffering. Someone who other people thought it was okay to walk over, and he goes to them and called her and said that you have worth to me. Someone who was a slave girl, and he gave her a promise for her life. Maybe she didn't have value to Sarai or Abram, but she did have value to God. He considered her valuable because she was his. He went from being a distant God that she probably cared very little about to being someone who she thought was worthy of having her listen. Her interaction with God made her go back to Abram and Sarai, to a place where she was mistreated, because God saw her and heard her cry, and she trusted in him. God found her alone and terrified, and he saw her for the worth that she had, not simply for her physical body, but he heard her fears. The fears she had for her unborn child, her uncertainty of what life held ahead for them. He saw her past and he saw her future. He saw her value. And that same God is continuing to find value in every one of us, even if those around us don't think we have equal worth to them. In our country, this is so easy to see. People are coming and trying to seek asylum, escaping gangs, poverty and war, domestic violence, and any number of problems. And people fear that these people are coming in under false pretenses. They don't actually see them for who they are. They see them for who the news might say they are. Gangs under disguise, not actually fathers, mothers, and children who are simply praying and searching for safety, who are willing to go on a dangerous journey to find that safety. But they aren't seen, not truly. They aren't in front of us. It's distant. It can be so easy to not give them a face, to not give them a name, and then not give their voice a chance to be heard. But God hears their cries and uses people like you and like me to care for those around us. He uses us to use our voices to help elevate their voice so that it can be heard more plainly by those in power. I have a friend, Becca, who recently went on a trip to Africa to run a 56-mile race in South Africa through mountains. She's insane. I would not do this race. And as she did the race, she did it to raise money for sponsorships for children. And she had a sponsored child named Boniface. And she learned all about sponsorship as part of this race. She learned how it affected communities, how it changed families, how it made a big difference in people's life. And she has several sponsored children herself, one of whom she went to visit when she was in Africa in Malawi, Boniface. She had talked about Boniface before she left. She knew he was a real kid. She had letters from him. She knew some of his likes and his dislikes. She knew he was a person. She said it wasn't until she was there in his village, sitting across from him, seeing how nervous he was, like a lot of kids, to meet a stranger that didn't speak his language, and for a kid that grew up in a small village in Africa, had a very different complexion than he was used to. And she said he became so much more real by seeing him. His love for soccer that she got to play with him became real. His family, his brothers, his mother and father, became real to her because he spent time with them, interacting with them, and actually hearing their stories out loud and not just on the page. She said it made all the letters that they had more personal because she got to see him actually, not just a photo, but see him in his actual presence and his energeticness and his shyness. See him come alive when he got to kick a soccer ball. See him be nervous when he had to use the translator to interact with her. And she's someone who was very passionate about sponsorship before. And after this, she said it made it so much more real to her how real these kids are. Not just a face on a picture, but a real child. And when I visited here a few weeks ago, me and my sister in the car ride on the way home talked about how beautiful we thought the time of prayer was. Seeing you guys take the time to verbally talk about how things were in your life, how you could pray for each other, what the needs were that you had, was beautiful, and something I see like we often miss. We are so encouraged to pray that oftentimes we forget that prayer does have power, and praying together in community is a beautiful way to show that you care for each other, that you hear each other, and that you see each other. As we drove home, we talked about the fact that we couldn't believe that we had witnessed this beautiful act of prayer and worship, something that we hadn't seen at another church, really, in the same way before. Seeing you guys ask each other how things were, what the prayer needs were, show that you cared. It showed that you saw each other and that you listened to each other. Even when it wasn't easy, even when it was things that were painful and hard, but also when it was things that were joyous, rejoicing for recoveries, for good diagnoses. It's a hard word. But it was a beautiful display of how the Christian body can love each other. And then it struck me that the text calls the person who visits Hagar the angel of the Lord. But Hagar gives this person the name, the God who sees me. And so you have to wonder, did Hagar just give this name to this person? Or does she see God in the person that interacted with her, in the incarnate that he came in to be? The incarnate God was there before Jesus. He was there with her on the road. And he's there with each and every one of us. God can use each and every one of us to be the person that sees another, to be the person that hears another, to be the God when they need it. God can use us to be his church in a very real and active way. Because God shows up for Hagar on the side of the road. He sees her pain, her hurt, and he comforts her. He calls her by her name and gives her identity back to her. And he shows up in our lives as well. He shows up when we're taking the time to pray for each other, to pray for our needs. He shows up when we need a meal and someone brings one to us. He shows up when we're just overwhelmed by pain and grief and someone texts us that I hope you're okay. Do you need anything? He shows up in a hug. God deeply loves us, and he uses the body of believers to come alongside of us, to show us that we have worth, that we have value, and that we have a future that, like Hagar's, may not be filled with only positive and good things to come, but that we will not be alone in our future, that God is with us even in the bad times and even in the good times. We have a God that listens to our hearts, to the cries that we can't even verbalize because it's so painful. A God that thinks that we are of worth to him, that we are worthy to be seen, and that we are worthy to be heard. Amen.